Everything is Commander now. You've certainly heard that adage before. You can't say you're a Magic player these days without somebody mentioning Commander, am I right? And I constantly see people say that Wizards of the Coast only design cards with 100 cards singleton casual in mind now, which simply isn't true. There are clear and conscious choices in Bloomburrow to push standard archetypes that just don't play all that well in Commander, like Lizard Aggro, for example. And that's one example among many others. With that said, though, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Commander isn't a very high priority concern on the totem pole of ideas. I'd say it's almost certainly at the very top of that hierarchy, but I just want to start out by getting this sanity check going. But to be clear, even the Modern Horizons set had Commander decks this time round. The set designed for Modern had these cards showing up in Commander decks. Yes, Commander is the focus, but it's not the sole concern of Magic the Gathering design now. The people saying that Modern Horizon sets were just Commander Horizons are bad at Magic, and they don't know what the they're talking about. Again, to clarify painfully, it's not that those sets didn't have Commander in mind, but it's abundantly clear that cards were aimed at redefining Modern and Legacy in there. Any F&M warrior upwards can see that. So with that slightly upsetting intro out of the way that people are definitely going to disagree with, let's get on to the main topic. Let's talk about when Commander designs go wrong. I'm going to talk about when they mess up the designs for Commander that have a lasting effect on the rest of the game. And those effects aren't often good ones, like the lingering stank of when you've farted in an elevator on the way to work but you accidentally shot and followed through. Or worse yet, seismic level defecations that are so severe that we need bans to clean up the mess that they made in aisle 5. So grab yourself a sody pop, hashtag not sponsored by Monster, and kick your feet up and relax as we talk about Magic the Gathering. I just got wet mildew all over my face. In the history of wizardy rectangular playing cards. Back in the yesteryear of 2011, the Commander precons dropped for the first time, solidifying what Commander was, taking it from fan format to officially supported casual pastime for the masses. In that first drop, 2 cards were so powerful, niche, and efficient that they managed to make their way into the legacy decks. We had Flusterstorm and Scavenging Ooze represent a unique, bad design that wasn't about their power level or abilities. I'm not talking about badly designed cards per se, but more products. The idea of having a card exclusively show up in one product that is then a relatively limited print run. And this leads to multiple problems. The first is a rising price. If you only get one Scavenging Ooze and a $30 precon, you might want a playset of Scavenging Ooze or Flusterstorm, right? The card begins to climb in price. This then leads to people buying up the precon decks that have Flusterstorm in them, which is Political Puppets or Scavenging Ooze in the Mimeoplasm deck, and the other 2 get left behind on shelves. To explain that a little bit for those of you that don't procure product for stores, neither do I, but I'm so in the weeds of this shit that I know this nerdy stuff. When a store buys a Commander 2011 set to sell to you, the consumer, they buy 4 or 2 copies of each of, so sometimes 8 of those decks. So they get all 4. Now, if 2 of them sell out because they're hotly anticipated, hotly excited because the reprints are good or the new cards are good, the other 2 sit on store shelves and begin to rot. You see this with event decks when one is better than the other. One of them will just sit on shelves and rot forever. And more recently, we saw it with the Doctor Who decks. You could not get timey-wimey the David Tennant deck for love nor money because David Tennant is popular and several of the cards in there are pretty damn good for Commander. The other 3 were in abundance, and thus the timey-wimey one went up on secondary markets, and stores didn't want to buy in more Doctor Who, risking holding on to the other decks that people wanted less. Further to that, card design cycles follow a 2-year process. So when cards suddenly become popular overnight, perhaps unpredictably by Wizards can't act very quickly to reprint and feed that demand with more supply. And we saw this with Scavenging Ooze. Around 2 years later in M14, we got a reprint. We got a reprint in M14, bringing it into standard and lowering the price significantly, and then we got a Jewels of the Planeswalker promo around the same time, which was a promotion for people who bought the game on PC. Remember, at the time, Scavenging Ooze was like a $10 card even after the standard reprint. It was a bit more expensive than that prior to that, so the idea of getting a free one by buying a game and then going to your local store and getting the card supplied by Wizards to your local store was a no-brainer. It was awesome. I bought the game on 2 different platforms to get 2 different promos because I'm a loser. Ironically, the Scavenging Ooze was the more exciting one amongst Bone Scythe Sliver and Ogre Battle Driver, which were for the PS3 and Xbox 360 respectively, but now moving forward, where Scavenging Ooze has been reprinted several times because it's a competitive staple, and Bone Scythe Sliver and Ogre Battle Driver haven't, even though they are reasonably niche Commander cards, those 2 are now worth 3 or 4 times the price of the Scavenging Ooze promo. Magic is a quirky game and world to be into, and also we should pause here to point and say this is a good thing. Wizards saw that Scavenging Ooze was popular in Modern and Legacy and was a standard card for a while too when they reprinted the standard, and they kept reprinting it over the years. It's kind of fell to the wayside as a playable card now because power creep is something that they're obsessed with, but prior to that and up until now they still are reprinting these things and not letting them climb to astronomically expensive prices. That's a good thing. In at number 4, we've got a similar culprit. We have True Name motherfucking Nemesis. This name struck fear into the heart of Death and Taxes players throughout Legacy for a long old time. It used to be a staple in Stoneblade decks, in Merfolk decks, and on rare occasion, other tempo lists too. It was originally printed in Commander 2013 with a mechanic that was basically solely aimed at a table of 4 people. As True Name Nemesis enters the battlefield, you pick a player. And True Name Nemesis has protection from that player, meaning it can't be blocked by creatures that player controls, it can't be targeted or damaged by effects of that player, and it can't be enchanted by effects of that player either. In a multiplayer situation of 4 players, this is perfectly reasonable. Sometimes you will equip it with weapons and hit one player to death, just beat the living shit out of them. The other players will look on with glee. It's Commander, who cares? On the other flip side of that, sometimes the player who's been named will make allegiances with other players, trying to get them to deal with the True Name for a political reason. Also, sweepers are really common in Commander then and now, so casting a Wrath of God or a Supreme Verdict, well, that will kill True Name Nemesis. Protection doesn't stop destroy effects if they don't target, in case you're new to Magic and didn't know that. And on top of all of that, a 3/1 that you can't block, outside of having equipment attached to it, is not scary in a 40 life format. But all of the things I just said, we can reiterate them now in a 1v1 situation are very different. You're trapped in the cage with True Name Nemesis, it ain't trapped with you. There's no one else to politicize with. You can't make allegiances, you can't ask for help from a friend that you could give a little bit of extra card draw to. Wraths aren't as common. A lot of decks in Legacy, for example, were not playing Supreme Verdict or Toxic Deluge, which wasn't printed at this time, or was printed around this time, I forget. But either way, those cards were not main deckable for a lot of decks. And on top of all that, a 3/1 is a reasonable clock as you grind out a game of 1v1 Magic when you've only got 20 life. Add to it a Sword of Fire and Ice or a Jit or a couple of lightning bolts and woof, we're off to the races. This is like the Scavenging Goose situation of being a $20 card and a Commander product that make that particular deck more chaseable or more desirable to scalpers and competitive players than the rest, but it's also a clear example of multiplayer rules just not scaling into 1v1. Interestingly, the technology that could have been used to curb this and fix this in 1v1 exists now. They came up with it in Battle Bond. The Battle Bond lands being untapped in multiplayer when you have multiple opponents as they enter, but not in 1v1 due to the wording on the card. Something like this could be added to a True Name Nemesis style beta, and that would make it less oppressive in a 1v1 environment. I do want to clarify that True Name Nemesis has fell off because of power creep. It was weakened by things like Plague Engineer. This card could name Merfolk and then that would kill these things. And Plague Engineer was playable because it was good into other X1 decks like Elves and D&T as well, but also answers to True Name Nemesis just rose and become more prominent in the metagame. More edicts, for example, like Shoulder's Edict. Although, to be fair, I've never seen anyone kill a True Name with a Shoulder's Edict, but I'm just pointing out that edicts have become stronger over the years too. And Saloon, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Saloon of Sea and Sky is a 3-mana Merfolk god that draws you cards and protects your other creatures. So in essence, not only was True Name Nemesis power crept out by better answers to it over time, but even the decks that would still probably play it, like Merfolk, end up getting better 3-drops in, yes, you guessed it, a Modern Horizon set that basically power crept out the option of playing the beta. Playing an untargetable beta is not as good as playing a thing that protects your entire board and draws you cards, whilst being for the same damage. In at number 3, we're going to step away from the Commander decks for a moment and talk about sets that were printed with other formats in mind. We're going to talk about an old friend. Someone you haven't thought about in a while. Maybe you should call them. It's clear to anyone paying attention that legendary creatures are a focus, a growing one, even in non-Commander products. The number of legends per set and in Magic overall has been growing exponentially. I've done videos on it, I'll link them in the cards and similar. And sometimes these cards are very, very clearly built with Commander in mind and nothing else. Voja is an example of this, push to shit for Commander. But there's a worse example than Voja, much worse. Entering stage left, an old friend, Hogak, the Arisen Necropolis. This guy absolutely dominated Modern until eating a ban to the face, but not before Wizards banned other cards first for his sins, as they avoided banning a big splashy rare from the most recent power crept set. That's a whole other video that I'm pretty sure I've done before. Hogak was designed for Commander, not in the sense that it's a legendary so it must be for Commander, I mean in the sense that there was a Twitch clip somewhere that I could not find for this video. That's a true story, by the way. I even tweeted about this. If you at home know where this clip is or have a link to it, I would love to use that clip again. I think it was Melissa Del Toro. I'm not throwing shade. I'm going to talk about mistakes in a moment and how they come about, right? But in the clip, these designers, when asked what is up with Hogak, simply respond with, we just thought it'd be a good Commander.
I just think they're neat.
This is the one thing we didn't want to happen. Hogak is a reasonable, inoffensive, and fun Commander, but in a 1v1 situation where you can cast it as early as turn 2 and sack it to cards like Altar of Dementia to recast it and, well, combo your opponent to death, it's broken. It's quite literally cracked in half. And this brings us to a really good underlying point that underpins this entire video that I've snuck in some ruminations on the idea of game design in a game that has 30 years of legacy. These are all examples of where Commander design philosophy went wrong, but in essence, trying to design for Commander whilst also appeasing a huge, wide-ranging card pool that pours into and filters into other formats is very hard. It must be an incredibly difficult job to do. And you know Wizards of the Coast do not invest in like playtesting for Modern or Legacy. That's just not a thing, right? Although arguably they did it a bit more for Modern Horizons. Anyway, and that tension with the rest of the game must be stressful. You've literally the entirety of the longest running trading card game to consider when designing for Commander and how it affects other formats like Vintage, Legacy, Canadian Highlander, and similar. Hogak was a mistake, but it was a mistake born out of experimentation. And I have said this before and I'll say it again. I would rather that than design be stifled by the existence of formats like Legacy. And on that note, a example to illustrate this and examine that further is the Initiative. White Plume Adventure is banned in Legacy for how oppressive the Initiative is in a 1v1 scenario, and in that format in particular. When you take the Initiative, you enter into a unique dungeon. Something I'm going to come back to in a moment about dungeons. That's a whole other bit of baggage that I will not ignore. You can take different routes to the dungeon, but essentially you grab yourself a land, and then with each room you enter, you grow a creature with counters, you shoot your opponent for 5 life loss, making the clock very fast, you draw a card, and then finally another creature, perhaps another initiative creature, is found within your deck, the top X amount of cards or whatever. It gains hexproof, gets some counters. That last bit essentially says, haha, fuck you, I win. The innovation of Initiative over the dungeons from AFR or Adventures in the Forgotten Realms was that you actually progress every upkeep that you have the Initiative to create pressure on other players to do something. And that pressure is when they make contact with you with a combat creature, the player who hit you gains the Initiative. It is a piece of tech taken from the Monarch mechanic that was brought about from Conspiracy to encourage combat and swinging in a game of Commander. It works both for the limited environment from which it came, which was Battle for Baldur's Gate, one of my favorite sets of all time, but it works for Commander too, in encouraging newer players and less seasoned players to go to combat, a thing that they've acknowledged is difficult to teach new players to do. A mechanic like this just signposts it for you, and that is good. It works in that circumstance. But this also meant that in a 1v1 situation where there aren't 3 other players vying for control of it, if you get ahead with the Initiative and your opponent can't stick a creature to hit you with, you fall drastically behind and get beaten to death by what is effectively a multi-spell applying emblem. The main issue in Legacy was 4 copies of White Plume Adventurer alongside fast mana. Ancient Tomb plus Chrome Mox is just one of many examples of a turn 1 White Plume Adventurer taking the Initiative. At that point, it's pretty hard to fight back from it. Killing the creature even leaves the dungeon ticking up, which will accrue advantage, like potentially cards drawn, or just doming you for 5 life and finding them another creature. And that brings us back to the question of, was this mechanic badly designed in general, or was it badly designed for 1v1, but great for Commander? I'm gonna reveal my cards at this point. I love the Initiative. I think the mechanic is fantastic. I think it's the best of the dungeon mechanics, and I think the whole it being on combat damage is also great because it does encourage that back and forth and ebb and flow of a vibrant and dynamic game of Commander. I think it's excellent. Dual Commander recently came to Magic the Gathering Online, and it doesn't have the Initiative problem because you're only playing, singular copies of Initiative creatures, so you've probably got like 3 or 4 of them in your 100 card deck in total, and a lot of fast mana like Moxen, like Chrome Mox or Mox Amber, are banned out of the format, meaning a turn 1 Initiative is very uncommon, and it makes it easier for your opponent to deal with it. And the same can be said for Canadian Highlander as well, where although the fast mana is available, everyone's doing kind of broken stuff, and you're also not as consistent as the Legacy deck was with 4 copies of a 3 mana creature. So for the record, I thought it was dumb in Legacy, but I love it in Commander. And that's the duality of man. For inside you there are 2 wolves. One of you is feeling a little bit frustrated that you're smashing people with Initiative and Legacy and you know it's too good, and the other one is entering the Throne of the Dead 3 on an episode of Shuffle Up and Play. You know when you squeeze a donut and the jam comes out of the hole? It's like that, but with soldiers. The point again, to reiterate, is that I don't think you can expect them to design Commander around the nearing infinite card pool of Magic at this point. If every new mechanic for the multiplayer format had to consider whether or not it was broken when it interacted with things like Chrome Mox or Mox Diamond or Lion's Eye Diamond or Bazaar of Baghdad or Bridge from Below, or any number of numerous problematic not power creep, but like pushed or design mistake cards from the past, that would not be a very fun environment to design cards in. If anything, that conservative nature of avoiding that would lead to a stifled and boring approach to Magic. That's not to say I think they should power creep the shit out of everything. I think Modern Horizons' explicit attempt to power creep everything is bad. I'm just saying that Commander mechanics just accidentally breaking Legacy a little bit is something that I'm willing to accept if it makes Commander interesting. The other baggage of the initiative was that it came off the back of more and more and more to come. If we look at easy for you to say, chronologically, gameplay aids and emblems and shit. We already had 3 dungeons from Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Then a year later, we got the 4th dungeon, triggered by a different effect and behaving in a slightly different way. A refinement for sure and better in my opinion, but an additional cognitive load that people had to understand and then play with. But on top of that, you had emblems from Planeswalkers already, the Monarch emblem from Conspiracy, which is a regularly played thing in Commander and in Legacy. And then only a bit later, we had choosing a bloody ring bearer, which is in itself is a mechanic that I quite like, but again, it's introducing this new emblem thing we have to tick down to understand what is going on with the ring bearer. It's a lot of fucking text that is on emblems that are outside the game that aren't on the cards you're playing with. If you don't have access to the emblem or the internet, you don't actually know what they do. It is a lot of baggage. And in all fairness, they have peeled back from it. They've gotten away from that stuff and refined their design philosophy to not do this every other year or every 6 months, which is good. Again, hats off, clapping, applause for them actually improving on the things we've criticized in the past. Next up, we have Eminence. I think this mechanic fucking blows. It is confined to Commander for its usefulness, so it's not breaking Modern or Legacy, but ultimately, it's a great example of a design where they want to make Commander players have their hands held and ensure that they get their cake and that they eat it. Has your opponent dealt with your Commander effectively? Well, don't worry, it will still do shit in the command zone. You will get your value no matter what, no matter how much you fucked up this game. Most of the abilities are weak enough to not cause real problems, with Edgar Markov being the best example, the outlier of the strongest of the bunch, I think. I just strongly dislike the space of no effort of resources spent to get rewarded, as it feels like the most hand-holding, baby stabilizer, kid glove mechanic they've ever introduced to Commander. I think the idea of a commander that does something in the command zone whilst it's not in play is fine if you downplay the rest of the card, if you make it basically not very good or borderline useless once you play it. However, Edgar Markov, as an example, is where the first line is very, very good and the rest of it is just gravy on top, baby. The fact that he is the best Mardu vampire commander because of the Eminence ability, not because of anything else, just exaggerates it. But then when he gets into play, he also buffs, he enables a thing and does the thing. It kind of blows. The fact that it triggers from the command zone and on the battlefield also sucks. In Star Wars Unlimited, the new Star Wars game that I really like, if I had more time I would play it, you have a commander card with a passive or activate ability in your command zone, and when you finally deploy Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker or Obi-Wan or whatever to the battlefield, you get a creature with a different or similar ability in power and toughness, but you lose access to somewhat the ability that you had in the command zone. It means that there's a strategic choice in whether or not you deploy your commander or not. On top of the fact that once it dies, it's gone. You don't get the command attacks that you get in Commander. What I'm getting at is there's not much of a fucking strategic decision if it just works it all the time. Eminence blows. And I'm so glad that they've only gone back to it once with Sidar Jabari or whatever his name is. Good. Don't go back to it again. Fuck that mechanic. And if you thought that was the worst mechanic, well, we've got to number 1 now. What if I told you trouble comes in pairs? I'm going to talk about partner again. I tweeted about this a week ago, and people got confused. I'm not ragging on background or partners with or friends forever, all of which are refined and fixed versions of partner. I'm talking about OG raw dog base level partner. With partner, you get to pick 2 commanders, which is just it's so dumb. It's so dumb. Both of them go in your command zone. This was originally on 2 color pairs as well, so they just come out of the gate swinging in 2016, meaning that it helped you to fulfill a hole where there were not many 4 color commanders. But let's be frank, did we need to fill that fucking hole? Do we need more 4 color and 5 color commanders? No. Stop printing one every set, Wizards of the Coast. Wait, did Bloomberg not have one? Just realized that as I was talking. Restriction breeds creativity. And call me old fashioned, but I think having to make choices about the colors that you have access to in the deck building portion of this card game we all know and love is a good thing. Instead, partner made 4 color pairings easy, but with even more upside than say a Berea or a Saskia. Not only do you get access to the 4 colors for your deck, but you also get 2 cards in your command zone, both of which come with abilities of their own and can be cast individually. So normally you have 7 cards in hand and a commander, access to 8 cards on turn 1. Now, with these 4 color piles of nonsense, we have an additional attack up blocker or ability holding utility dork, you have your 7-card hand plus 2 commanders in the command zone, giving you access to 9 cards in your first turn. All for the low cost of only being able to play 98 cards in your main deck instead of 99, because you still have to get to 100. And the smart ones among you, or the fucking nerds like me, will realize that having 98 cards in your deck is an advantage. It's not a cost. Smaller decks means you will more likely draw your better cards. Having a smaller deck is 95% of the time a better thing, where you want to be in Magic. If you can reduce your deck size within the rules of the game, you are going to be playing with an advantage and not a disadvantage. I hated it when it landed, and I hated the omnipresence of Tymna plus Thrasios at higher powered tables. And it's still an issue to some extent in CDH now, with Rockside being a prominent deck. But albeit, okay, that deck is 3 colors, not 4, so that's one of the issues that I've just spoke about being removed. And primarily Silas is played for its colors, because there's no other blue-black commander. It's just a death touch blocker sometimes. Its text is rather not needed. But ultimately, it's still silly that you get a deck with extra cards every game, including a low-cost creature to power up some of your spells. Rograk enables things like Jessica's Will and Mox Amber and similar, but you also just get to custom make your color pairings too. And that's a point. They did come back to this in Commander Legends and they saw the error of their ways. All the commanders from Commander Legends were 1 color to avoid the 4 color nonsense. Even Wizards saw that what I was saying and what I said originally was correct. You don't want to enable too much 4 and 5 color bullshit. But they still pushed it with Rograk, right? Rograk is a 1 color red commander, but he's 0 mana. He's one of the cheapest commanders ever printed, and thus it unlocks a load of like intricacies, like I said, Mox Ambers and Jessica's Wills and similar from early parts of the game. Basically, both times they come with this, they went full force, and you should never go full force. I do, however, like the more finite versions of this, the more compacted and more parasitic, or at least confined versions of this. Partners with is 2 cards with no other options. They combo specifically with the other card of their name, Peer and Toothy being one of my favorites, basically allowing you to balance them without leaving them open-ended to abuse with combinations you haven't tested or predicted, and the same goes for Friends for Forever as well. Friends Forever? Friends Forever. The Stranger Things partner combos, allowing you to factor in that you can only use 2 from this small finite set of cards, and thus you can make them about as strong as a solo commander when you put 2 of them together. Arguably, you could have done this with the partner, making 2 hot parts not as strong as 1 whole with a solo commander. However, they didn't. They come out of the fucking door swinging with infinite mana engines like Thrasios that give you like a payoff having infinite mana and 2 color pairings and the cheapest commander you've ever seen. They really just shit the bed. They just shit all out the walls, just emptied their bowels both times and did it. And that's a genie you can't put back in the bottle, a poo flavored smelling genie if we continued the analogy. And now I'm just like, please don't do partner again. Do other versions of it. Do background. Backgrounds are my favorite fix for this. Abdul, Adrian, and Candlekeep Saga are the ones that I played on the latest episode of Shuffle and Play I was on. You get 2 cards in your command zone, but one of them is just an enchantment that cannot attack or block, and it only functions or does anything with your other commander being cast or played or in play. And thus you are reducing the effectiveness of these 2 cards as individual solo value engines or utility pieces. And they were cautious with background too, not giving us any 2 color backgrounds or commanders with it. And I kind of want them to explore that space very cautiously, but I mean very cautiously when they go back. Or I think inherently with background being an enchantment that doesn't do anything without your commander, it's really hard to fuck that up. Meanwhile, Thrasios and Tymna exist forever unless banned. I don't think they need to be banned, but my god do I find them fucking insufferable. The bed was well and truly soiled when they did the partner mechanic. And that's my top 6 that I started out thinking was a 5, and I think I got confused with numbers in this video, and some of you might have noticed. The video is also way longer than I thought it would be, but I'm just going to end on this point. I like that they make mistakes if they, fix them in due course and quickly. It's only when it really fucks things, like currently Nadu and Modern for months at a time, that I start to take real issue. I'd rather they experiment and do interesting things than never experiment and never do interesting things. I think it's impossible to expect them to balance things around Lion's Eye Diamond and Chrome Mox, because those cards were a problem, have been a problem, and will always be a problem. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. If you've enjoyed the video, check out the link to my Patreon in the link description below, or to my next What Not stream, and I'll see you in the next one. Ta-ta for now.